The first light of dawn crept over the jagged horizon, casting long shadows across the alien landscape. The air shimmered with an otherworldly glow, as though the atmosphere itself was alive, pulsing faintly with hues of violet and gold. Strange flora swayed gently in a breeze that carried no scent but hummed with an almost imperceptible vibration. Towering crystalline structures jutted out of the ground like frozen lightning, their surfaces refracting the dim sunlight into cascading rainbows. It was a world unlike any human eyes had ever seen, or so one might think. Elliot Carter stood at the edge of a vast clearing, his boots sinking slightly into the soft, moss-like terrain beneath him. He wasn't supposed to be here. No human was. Yet here he was, surrounded by beings whose forms defied comprehension. They moved with fluid grace, their elongated limbs gliding effortlessly through the air as if gravity held little sway over them. Their skin, or what passed for it, seemed to ripple and shift, reflecting colors that didn't exist on Earth. Some bore intricate patterns etched into their translucent bodies, glowing faintly in syncopated rhythms, while others emitted soft chimes or melodic tones with every step they took. The ceremony had begun before Elliot even realized it. There was no grand announcement, no fanfare to signal its start. Instead, the aliens simply began to converge toward the center of the clearing, forming concentric circles around a raised dais made of some iridescent material that seemed to breathe with light. The air grew heavier, charged with anticipation, and Elliot felt his chest tighten, not from fear exactly, but from something deeper, more primal. This wasn't just a gathering. It was a convergence of purpose, a moment steeped in significance far beyond his understanding. He glanced down at his hands, calloused and rough from years spent fixing machinery aboard the research vessel that had brought him to this distant planet. How had he ended up here? The memory came flooding back, the malfunctioning shuttle, the crash landing, the days wandering alone until these creatures found him. At first, they had observed him warily, their luminous eyes scanning him as though trying to decipher some ancient code. But then, inexplicably, they had welcomed him, not with words, for they did not speak in any language he could recognize, but with gestures, with music, with light. And now, somehow, he was standing among them, part of this ritual he couldn't begin to fathom. A low hum began to rise from the assembled crowd, resonating deep within Elliot's bones. It wasn't unpleasant, but it was overwhelming, like being submerged in sound itself. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the vibrations wash over him, and when he opened them again, he noticed something new. One of the aliens, a figure taller than the rest, adorned with spiraling glyphs that pulsed brighter than the others, was approaching the dais. Its movements were deliberate, almost regal, and the crowd parted silently to allow it passage. As it ascended the platform, Elliot felt a strange pull, an inexplicable connection to the being that sent a shiver racing down his spine. And then it happened. The alien turned, its gaze locking onto Elliot with an intensity that froze him where he stood. Time seemed to slow as the creature extended one delicate limb, pointing directly at him. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, though whether it was surprise, awe, or something else entirely, Elliot couldn't tell. Before he could react, two smaller figures stepped forward, taking hold of his arms gently but firmly and guiding him toward the dais. Panic bubbled up inside him, but there was no resistance, no way to escape. Whatever was happening, he was powerless to stop it. As Elliot climbed the steps to stand beside the towering alien, the hum crescendoed into a symphony of sound, light, and motion. The patterns on the beings' bodies flared in unison, creating a kaleidoscope of shifting colors that danced across the clearing. Elliot's heart pounded in his chest as realization dawned. He wasn't merely a spectator. He was part of this ceremony now, and perhaps, against all odds, its central figure. The weight of countless alien gazes pressed upon Elliot as he stood frozen beside the towering figure on the dais. His mind raced, grappling with the surreal reality unfolding before him. What did they want from him? Why had they chosen him? The questions tumbled over one another, each more frantic than the last, yet none offered answers. All he could do was stare at the alien beside him, whose luminous presence seemed to command the very air around them. Its features were both alien and strangely familiar, as though glimpsed in a half-remembered dream. The spiraling glyphs adorning its form pulsed rhythmically, syncing with the thrumming energy coursing through the clearing. Elliot's breath hitched as the alien tilted its head, studying him with an intensity that felt almost invasive. It reached out a slender limb, its surface shimmering like liquid crystal, and touched his shoulder. The contact sent a jolt through him. Not painful, but electric, as though the alien's essence had briefly merged with his own. For a fleeting moment, he thought he understood something, a fragment of meaning buried deep within the gesture. Then it was gone, leaving only confusion and a growing sense of dread. Around them, the ceremony continued to escalate. The concentric circles of aliens began to sway in unison, their movements fluid and hypnotic. Their chimes and melodic tones wove together into a haunting harmony that filled the air, reverberating in Elliot's chest. He felt small, insignificant, yet inexplicably tethered to the scene unfolding around him. The alien beside him raised both arms high, and the crowd responded with a surge of light and sound so powerful it nearly knocked Elliot off balance. His knees buckled, but strong hands steadied him, hands belonging to the smaller figures who had escorted him to the dais. They weren't restraining him now, they were supporting him, their touch firm yet gentle. Panic clawed at the edges of Elliot's consciousness, threatening to overwhelm him. He wanted to run, to scream, to do anything to break free from this incomprehensible situation. But his body refused to obey. Instead, he found himself mirroring the movements of those around him, swaying slightly despite himself. The alien's glowing glyphs flared brighter, bathing him in waves of shifting color. Each pulse seemed to carry a question, a demand, a plea, he couldn't tell which. His thoughts fragmented, scattering like leaves in a storm. Was this some kind of test? A punishment? Or worse, an honor he hadn't earned? Then came the voice, not spoken aloud, but resonating directly in his mind. It wasn't a single voice but many, layered and harmonized, speaking in a language that bypassed words and spoke directly to his soul. "You are chosen," it said, or something close to it. The meaning was clear even if the phrasing wasn't. Chosen for what? Elliot's stomach churned as possibilities flickered through his mind, each more terrifying than the last. Sacrifice, alliance, bonding. The word groom floated unbidden into his thoughts, absurd and impossible, yet somehow fitting given the ceremonial context. His throat tightened, and he swallowed hard, fighting back the bile rising in his throat. The alien beside him lowered its arms, and the cacophony of sound and light dimmed slightly. It leaned closer, its face, if it could be called that, hovering mere inches from his own. Its eyes, vast and multifaceted, seemed to pierce through him, stripping away layers of doubt and fear until all that remained was raw vulnerability. Elliot's vision blurred as tears welled up, spilling down his cheeks unchecked. He didn't know whether they were tears of terror, awe, or something else entirely. All he knew was that he couldn't look away, couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The crowd fell silent, the hum fading into a soft whisper. In the stillness, Elliot became acutely aware of every detail. The coolness of the alien's touch, the rhythmic pulsing of its glyphs, the weight of expectation pressing down on him from all sides. He wanted to protest, to shout that this was wrong, that he didn't belong here, but no sound escaped his lips. Instead, he stood there, trembling, as the alien placed something cold and smooth into his hand. It was a small object, shaped like a teardrop and glowing faintly with an inner light. Elliot stared at it, his fingers closing instinctively around it as though it were the anchor keeping him grounded. For a moment, everything stopped. The aliens froze in place, their luminous forms dimming to a soft glow. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a suddenness that startled him, the alien beside him stepped back, breaking the connection between them. The crowd erupted once more, their voices rising in a chorus of approval, or perhaps triumph. Elliot couldn't tell. His grip tightened on the glowing object as he tried to steady himself, his mind reeling from the enormity of what had just transpired. Whatever this ceremony meant, whatever role he was expected to play, it was far from over. And deep down, he feared he might never truly understand it. The alien's retreat left Elliot exposed, standing alone on the dais with the glowing teardrop clutched tightly in his hand. The crowd's attention bore down on him like a physical force, their luminous eyes unblinking, their forms radiating an expectant energy that made his skin prickle. He felt as though he were drowning in their collective gaze, unable to draw breath or think clearly. Yet amidst the chaos of his thoughts, one thing became painfully clear. This moment wasn't about him, it was about them. Whatever significance the ceremony held, it was tied to their culture, their beliefs, their lives. And somehow, impossibly, he had been woven into it. The alien who had guided him to the dais returned, its movements deliberate and unhurried. It extended a limb toward him, palm up, as though inviting him to place the teardrop into its grasp. Elliot hesitated, his fingers tightening reflexively around the object. It felt warm now, almost alive, its glow pulsing faintly in time with his heartbeat. Reluctantly, he extended his arm, placing the teardrop into the alien's waiting hand. The instant their hands met, a surge of light erupted between them, blinding and intense. Elliot stumbled back, shielding his eyes, but the light didn't fade immediately. It lingered, wrapping around him like a cocoon, filling the clearing with an ethereal brilliance that seemed to stretch infinitely outward. When the light finally dimmed, Elliot blinked rapidly, trying to adjust to the sudden shift. The alien holding the teardrop had stepped back, joining the others in the circle. Their forms shimmered with renewed vigor, their glyphs glowing brighter than ever before. But something had changed. The air felt different, charged, yes, but also tinged with an emotion Elliot couldn't quite name. Hope. Anticipation? Resolve? Whatever it was, it resonated deeply within him, stirring something long buried beneath layers of cynicism and self-preservation. Elliot's gaze drifted to the alien who had first singled him out, the towering figure now standing at the edge of the dais. Its expression, if such a term could apply, was unreadable, yet there was a softness to its demeanor that hadn't been there before. It inclined its head slightly, a gesture that might have been acknowledgement or gratitude. Then, without warning, it turned and began to move away, its lithe form weaving gracefully through the crowd. The others followed suit, their synchronized movements dissolving into individual paths as they dispersed across the clearing. Within moments, the once-packed space was empty save for Elliot and the two smaller aliens who had escorted him earlier. One of them approached him cautiously, its movements hesitant yet deliberate. It extended a limb toward him, not in demand but in invitation. Elliot stared at it, his mind racing. Should he follow? Could he refuse? The alien waited patiently, its glowing patterns flickering softly as though encouraging him. After a long pause, Elliot nodded, taking a tentative step forward. The alien led him away from the dais, its companion trailing silently behind. Together, they moved through the crystalline forest, the towering structures casting fractured reflections of light that danced across their path. As they walked, Elliot's thoughts churned. He replayed the events of the ceremony over and over, searching for clues, for meaning, for anything that might explain why he had been chosen. Was it random chance? Some quirk of fate? Or had they seen something in him, something he couldn't see in himself? The questions gnawed at him, relentless and unanswerable. Yet beneath the turmoil, a strange sense of calm began to take root. Perhaps it was the rhythmic hum of the alien world around him, or the steady presence of his guides, or simply the exhaustion of having endured something so profoundly alien. Whatever the cause, he found himself surrendering to the moment, allowing himself to be led without resistance. They arrived at a structure unlike any Elliot had seen before, a dome-shaped edifice composed of interlocking plates that shimmered like liquid metal. The entrance yawned open as they approached, revealing a chamber bathed in soft, ambient light. Inside, the air was cooler, carrying a faint scent that reminded him of rain-soaked earth. The walls were adorned with intricate carvings that seemed to shift and change as he looked at them, telling stories he couldn't begin to comprehend. At the center of the room stood a pedestal, its surface smooth and polished to a mirror-like sheen. The alien gestured for him to approach, and after a brief hesitation, he complied. Standing before the pedestal, Elliot felt a wave of déjà vu. The glowing teardrop rested atop it, its light pulsing steadily, as though waiting for him. He reached out instinctively, his fingers brushing against its surface. The moment he made contact, images flooded his mind. Visions of landscapes both familiar and foreign, of faces he recognized yet couldn't name, of moments that felt like memories but belonged to someone else. Tears sprang to his eyes as the emotions hit him full force. Joy, sorrow, longing, belonging. It was overwhelming, beautiful, and utterly incomprehensible. When the vision subsided, Elliot found himself kneeling on the floor, his hands trembling as he clutched the teardrop to his chest. The aliens watched him silently, their expressions inscrutable. For the first time since arriving on this strange world, Elliot felt a flicker of understanding, not of the ceremony itself, but of his place within it. Whatever role he was meant to play, it wasn't just about him. It was about connection, about bridging worlds, about finding meaning in the unknown. And though the road ahead was uncertain, he knew one thing for sure: he couldn't turn back now. The journey through the crystalline forest stretched endlessly before Elliot, each step weighted with the burden of unanswered questions. The alien guides flanked him, their luminous forms casting eerie shadows that danced across the mossy terrain. Despite their silent presence, Elliot felt more alone than ever. His mind churned with fragments of the visions he'd experienced in the dome, the faces, the landscapes, the emotions that had surged through him like tidal waves. They lingered at the edges of his consciousness, refusing to coalesce into clarity. He clutched the glowing teardrop tightly, its warmth a small comfort against the chill of uncertainty. As they ventured deeper into the alien wilderness, the environment shifted subtly. The towering crystalline structures gave way to dense groves of bioluminescent trees, their branches intertwined like skeletal fingers reaching skyward. Tiny, moth-like creatures flitted between the glowing foliage, casting soft halos of light that illuminated their path. The air grew thicker, humming with an undercurrent of energy that prickled against Elliot's skin. He paused momentarily, gazing upward at the canopy above. The stars were invisible here, obscured by the radiant foliage, but their absence only heightened the sense of isolation. He wondered fleetingly if he would ever see Earth's night sky again. His guides urged him onward, their gestures gentle yet insistent. Elliot complied, though his legs felt heavy, as if the weight of the unknown future pressed down on him with every step. The silence between them was deafening, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant chime-like calls of unseen creatures. It was maddening, this quietude, this lack of explanation. Elliot yearned to ask questions, to demand answers, but the language barrier loomed insurmountable. Even if he could find the words, would they understand? Would they care? Hours passed, or perhaps it was days. Time had become an abstract concept in this alien realm. Hunger gnawed at his stomach, but he ignored it, focusing instead on putting one foot in front of the other. Fatigue settled into his bones, yet he pressed on, driven by a mixture of fear and determination. The forest seemed endless, a labyrinth of light and shadow that twisted and turned without pattern or purpose. Just when despair began to creep in, the trees thinned, revealing a vast expanse of open land bathed in the pale glow of twin moons. At the center of the clearing stood another structure, larger and more imposing than the dome he had visited earlier. Its design was starkly different, angular and asymmetrical, its surface covered in jagged protrusions that caught the moonlight and refracted it into dazzling beams. Elliot's heart sank as he realized this was their destination. His guides quickened their pace, leading him toward the structure with a sense of urgency that set his nerves on edge. What awaited him inside? Another ceremony? Another test? Or something far darker? The entrance yawned wide as they approached, revealing a cavernous interior lit by floating orbs of light that hovered at varying heights. The air inside was cool and still, carrying a faint metallic tang that made Elliot's nostrils flare. At the far end of the chamber stood a massive archway, its frame adorned with intricate carvings similar to those in the dome. Beyond it lay darkness, impenetrable and foreboding. Elliot's guide stopped short of the archway, gesturing for him to proceed alone. Fear gripped him like a vice. He turned to them, shaking his head, pleading silently for them to accompany him. But they remained rooted in place, their glowing forms dimming slightly as though urging him forward. With a deep breath, Elliot stepped through the archway, the darkness swallowing him whole. For a moment, panic threatened to overwhelm him. Then, slowly, the space around him began to illuminate, revealing a circular room dominated by a pedestal identical to the one in the dome. Resting atop it was a second teardrop, its glow fainter than the one he carried. Elliot approached cautiously, his footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness. As he drew closer, the teardrop on the pedestal began to brighten, its light pulsing in sync with the one in his hand. He hesitated, unsure of what to do next. Then, as if guided by an unseen force, he lifted the teardrop he carried and placed it beside the other. The moment they touched, a surge of energy coursed through the room, sending shockwaves rippling outward. Elliot staggered back, shielding his eyes as the light intensified, blinding and all-consuming. When the brilliance faded, He found himself standing in a completely different environment. Gone was the alien structure. Instead, he stood on a rocky plateau overlooking a sprawling cityscape unlike anything he had ever seen. Towering spires of glass and metal rose into the sky, their surfaces shimmering with iridescent hues. Between them flowed rivers of liquid light, crisscrossing the city in intricate patterns. The air buzzed with activity, filled with the sounds of movement and life. Aliens of various forms bustled about, their interactions marked by flashes of light and bursts of melodic tones. Elliot's heart raced as he took in the scene. This was no mere settlement. It was a civilization, thriving and vibrant. And somehow, impossibly, he was part of it. The realization hit him like a freight train, knocking the breath from his lungs. He wasn't just a participant in their ceremonies. He was a thread in the tapestry of their existence. The weight of it nearly crushed him, but beneath the fear and awe, a spark of hope ignited. If he could survive this, if he could navigate this alien world and find his place within it, perhaps he could bridge the gap between their species. Perhaps he could bring understanding where there had been none before. But as he stood there, gazing out at the city, a shadow passed overhead. He looked up to see a massive ship descending from the sky, its hull gleaming ominously in the light of the twin moons. It wasn't alien, it was human. His chest tightened as recognition dawned. This was no rescue mission. It was an invasion. The implications struck him like a hammer blow. Everything he had experienced, everything he had come to understand, was now in jeopardy. The fragile connection he had forged with this alien world hung precariously in the balance, threatened by forces beyond his control. Elliot's mind raced as he weighed his options. He could flee, seek refuge among the aliens who had welcomed him, however cryptically. Or he could confront the humans, try to reason with them, warn them of the consequences of their actions. Neither choice promised safety, and both carried the risk of catastrophic failure. Yet as the ship descended closer, its engines roaring like thunder, Elliot knew he couldn't stand idly by. Whatever happened next, he would face it head-on, armed with nothing but the fragile bond he had built and the unwavering resolve to protect it. The ship descended with a deafening roar, its shadow swallowing the plateau whole. Elliot's heart pounded as he watched it touch down, the ground trembling beneath his feet. A hatch opened, and a ramp extended, spilling harsh artificial light onto the alien terrain. Figures emerged, humans clad in sleek, militarized suits, their faces obscured by helmets equipped with visors that glinted menacingly in the moonlight. They moved with precision, weapons at the ready, scanning the area with an intensity that made Elliot's stomach churn. For a moment, they didn't notice him. He stood frozen, torn between staying hidden and stepping forward. But then one of them turned, their helmets swiveling sharply in his direction. The figure raised a hand, signaling the others to halt, and approached cautiously. Elliot recognized the insignia on their chest plate, United Earth Expeditionary Force. His throat tightened. These weren't explorers or scientists, they were soldiers, sent here for reasons he could only guess at. And judging by the way they carried themselves, diplomacy wasn't high on their list of priorities. Elliot Carter? The voice crackled through a speaker in the soldier's helmet, distorted but unmistakably human. Is that you? He nodded numbly, unable to find his voice. The soldier lowered their weapon slightly, though not entirely, and gestured for him to come closer. As Elliot stepped into the light, he felt exposed, vulnerable. Behind him, the alien city pulsed with life, oblivious to the danger descending upon it. He glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see the aliens rushing to confront the intruders. But there was no sign of them, not yet. Report, the soldier barked, their tone clipped and authoritative. What's your status? Are you injured? I'm fine, Elliot managed, his voice hoarse. But you need to stand down. You don't understand what's happening here. The soldier tilted their head, clearly skeptical. We're here to retrieve you, Carter. Intelligence suggests this planet is uninhabited. If there are hostiles, they're not hostile. Elliot snapped, surprising even himself with the force of his words. They saved me. They brought me into their world. This isn't some barren rock, it's a civilization. A thriving one. The soldier hesitated, exchanging a glance with their comrades. For a fleeting moment, Elliot thought he saw doubt flicker across their face. Then their expression hardened again. "Regardless, we have orders. You're coming with us." No, the word came out sharper than he intended, but he didn't care. He planted his feet firmly, clutching the glowing teardrop tightly in his hand. "I'm not leaving. Not like this." The soldier raised their weapon slightly, their stance shifting into something more aggressive. "This isn't up for debate, Carter. Step aside, or we'll take you by force." Elliot's mind raced. He couldn't fight them, not physically, but maybe he didn't have to. Maybe he could appeal to whatever shred of humanity remained beneath their armor. "You don't get it," he said, his voice trembling with urgency. "These beings, they chose me. For something. I don't fully understand it myself, but it's important, to them, and maybe to us too. If you interfere now, you could destroy everything." The soldier paused, their grip on the weapon loosening slightly. "Chose you for what?" Elliot hesitated, unsure how to explain without sounding insane. "A ceremony. A bond. Something sacred to them. Look," he held up the teardrop, its glow pulsing faintly. "This is proof. It's part of their culture, their beliefs. You can't just barge in here like this is unclaimed territory. It's not yours to take." The soldier studied him for a long moment, then glanced back at the others. One of them stepped forward, holding a device that hummed softly. "Scans indicate anomalous energy readings consistent with advanced technology," they reported. "Recommend further investigation before proceeding." "Negative," the lead soldier replied. "Orders are clear. Secure the subject and assess the situation afterward." Elliot's chest tightened. Orders. Of course it always came down to orders. He took a step back, his eyes darting toward the alien city. If he could reach it, if he could somehow warn them. Before he could act, the air around him shimmered. A low hum filled the space, growing louder with each passing second. The soldiers froze, their weapons snapping upward as they scanned the area. Then, from the shadows of the plateau, the aliens emerged. Dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, materialized silently, their forms glowing brighter than ever before. Their movements were fluid and synchronized, forming a protective barrier between Elliot and the humans. The lead soldier cursed under their breath, raising their weapon higher. "Stand down," they shouted, though whether it was directed at Elliot or the aliens, it was impossible to tell. Elliot turned to face the aliens, his heart pounding. "Wait," he pleaded, though he doubted they understood his words. "Please, don't hurt them. They don't know any better." One of the aliens, the towering figure who had first singled him out, stepped forward, its presence commanding. Its glyphs flared brightly, casting the entire plateau in a kaleidoscope of colors. The soldiers flinched, their weapons wavering. For a moment, no one moved. The tension was palpable, thick enough to choke on. Then the alien raised a limb, pointing directly at Elliot. The gesture was unmistakable. Whatever role he had been chosen for, it wasn't over yet. The lead soldier lowered their weapon slightly, confusion evident in their posture. "Carter, what's going on?" Elliot swallowed hard, his mind racing. He didn't fully understand it himself, but he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't let this escalate. "Listen to me," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "You need to leave. Before things go too far." "And leave you here?" the soldier demanded. "That's not an option." "It has to be," Elliot insisted. "I'm part of this now. Whatever happens next, it's bigger than all of us." The soldiers stared at him, their visor reflecting the glow of the alien's glyphs. For a moment, it seemed like they might argue. Then, reluctantly, they nodded. "Fine. But if you're wrong about this—" "I'm not," Elliot interrupted. "Trust me." The soldier hesitated, then signaled for their team to fall back. Slowly, methodically, they retreated up the ramp and into the ship. As the hatch closed behind them, Elliot exhaled a shaky breath, his legs threatening to give out beneath him. The aliens remained motionless, their glowing forms casting an otherworldly light across the plateau. When the ship finally lifted off, disappearing into the sky, the tension began to ease. The aliens turned their attention back to Elliot, their expressions unreadable. One of them, the same figure who had guided him earlier, approached, extending a limb toward him. Elliot hesitated, then reached out, placing his hand in theirs. The connection surged once more, filling him with warmth and clarity. Images flooded his mind, visions of unity, of understanding, of two worlds intertwined. Tears welled up in his eyes as he realized the truth. This wasn't just about him. It was about bridging divides, forging connections where none had existed before. And somehow, impossibly, he was the key. As the aliens led him back toward the city, Elliot allowed himself a small measure of hope. The road ahead would be fraught with challenges, both from within and without. But for the first time in his life, he felt like he belonged to something greater than himself, something worth fighting for. Whatever lay ahead, he would face it, not alone, but alongside those who had chosen him, trusted him, believed in him. The alien city stretched before Elliot like a living tapestry, its spires and rivers of light pulsing with an energy that seemed to resonate with his very soul. As he walked alongside the beings who had chosen him, their glowing forms casting soft halos in the twilight, he felt a profound sense of purpose settle over him. This wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about transformation. He was no longer merely a human stranded on an alien world. He was a bridge between two civilizations, a vessel for understanding. When they reached the heart of the city, the towering structures gave way to a vast plaza surrounded by intricate carvings that shimmered faintly under the twin moon's glow. At its center stood another dais, this one adorned with symbols that mirrored those etched into the teardrops still clutched in Elliot's hand. The aliens gathered around it in concentric circles, their movements fluid and deliberate, as though guided by some unseen rhythm. Elliot hesitated at the edge of the crowd, unsure whether to step forward or remain where he was. The towering figure, the one who had first singled him out, approached him once more. Its glyphs flared brightly, bathing him in waves of shifting color. Without hesitation, it extended a limb toward him, inviting him to ascend the dais. Elliot swallowed hard, his pulse quickening, but he nodded and climbed the steps. When he reached the top, the alien placed a second teardrop into his free hand. It glowed faintly, its light syncing with the one he already held, creating a harmonious pulse that echoed through the plaza. For a moment, everything fell silent. Even the hum of the alien world seemed to pause, holding its breath. Then, with a suddenness that startled him, the alien stepped back, leaving Elliot alone on the dais. The crowd erupted into a symphony of light and sound, their voices rising in a chorus so powerful it vibrated deep within his chest. He closed his eyes, letting the sensations wash over him, feeling both insignificant and infinite all at once. And then, the visions returned. This time, they weren't fragmented or fleeting, they were vivid and unrelenting, flooding his mind with images of unity and connection. He saw humans and aliens working side by side, building something new and extraordinary. He saw cultures blending, languages merging, ideas flowing freely between species. He saw peace, not the fragile kind born of treaties and compromises, but the enduring kind rooted in mutual respect and shared purpose. But amidst the beauty, there were shadows. He saw conflict too, humans resistant to change, clinging to fear and mistrust. He saw moments of doubt, of betrayal, of pain. Yet even these darker visions carried a thread of hope, a reminder that progress was never without struggle. When the visions subsided, Elliot opened his eyes to find the crowd watching him expectantly. Their luminous forms dimmed slightly, as though waiting for him to act. Slowly, deliberately, he raised the two teardrops above his head, their combined glow illuminating the plaza in a radiant cascade of light. The crowd responded with a collective gasp, their bodies swaying in unison as though moved by an invisible tide. Elliot didn't know what came next. He couldn't predict how humanity would react when they learned of this world, or how the aliens would respond to further contact. But he knew one thing for certain: he wouldn't let fear dictate the future. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them with courage and conviction, guided by the bond he had forged here. As the ceremony drew to a close, the aliens began to disperse, their forms fading into the night like embers drifting on the wind. Only the towering figure remained, standing silently beside him. For a long moment, they simply gazed at each other, neither speaking nor moving. Then, with a gesture so subtle it might have been imagined, The alien inclined its head, a sign of acknowledgement, of gratitude, of trust. Elliot nodded in return, his throat tight with emotion. "Thank you," he whispered, knowing the words would go unheard but needing to say them anyway. The alien lingered for a moment longer, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the glowing cityscape. Alone on the dais, Elliot lowered the teardrops, their light dimming but not extinguishing. He looked out over the alien city, its beauty breathtaking yet tinged with the weight of responsibility. Somewhere beyond the horizon, Earth awaited, its people divided, its leaders uncertain, its future unwritten. And somewhere closer, the ship that had come for him hovered in orbit, its crew likely debating their next move. Elliot took a deep breath, steadying himself. He didn't have all the answers, and he knew the road ahead would be fraught with obstacles. But for the first time in his life, he felt ready. Ready to fight for understanding. Ready to build bridges where none had existed before. Ready to embrace the unknown, not as a burden, but as a gift. With the teardrops cradled gently in his hands, Elliot descended the dais and began walking toward the edge of the city. Behind him, the alien world pulsed with life, its rhythms steady and eternal. Ahead of him lay uncertainty, but also possibility. Whatever happened next, he would face it not as Elliot Carter, the lost astronaut, but as Elliot Carter, the bridge between worlds.